so fetch.
We ready for this Mayhem doc? I wrestled a bear once. Oh god. I wonder if this is like... Yeah, see, it's only got the copyright claim from the audio library, so it's like fine. So I'm excited to watch this. That's the Sloppy Clav song. Get together for game nights. This is just like a YouTuber that did one, but I figured we could watch it. It's only 30 minutes, but we can watch a shorter one. I could find a shorter one.
Black metal has become one of the most talked about, controversial subgenres over the last few decades. Its history is so long, rich, and confusing that even trying to dissect the genre as a whole is a task that many music journalists have failed at. But there is one man that has so many ties to the genre and such an influence on the music that merely talking about him and the band he was a part of is a crash course into the history of black metal itself. This man was Eystein Aarseth, otherwise known as Euronymous. He was the co-founder of the Norwegian band
Let me know if the
known
volume
as
is
Mayhem,
okay.
a notorious group that had an intense influence on the scene as a whole. And he perfectly encapsulated the absolute insanity that some of these black metal icons took part in. His extreme antics, nihilistic nature, and abrasive persona made him stand out like a sore thumb in a genre that was already pretty intense to begin with. All of these elements would eventually combine to a shocking conclusion in 1990.
So I wanted to watch this partly to learn more history of Mayhem, but also because I'm doing a Satanic Panic video that I'm researching for. You can't hear it over your AC unit? Oh my god.
3, when Euronymous was killed by his own bandmate. But we have about 1,000 other crazy things to talk about before we get to that point. So strap in and join me as we have a look at the insane life of one of black metal's biggest icons.
Varge is a whole meme in itself.
On the 22nd of March,
oh my gosh!
1968,
I just realized this was posted on my birthday in 2020. That is so funny. Almost to the day, like 3 years to the day almost.
Eystein Aarseth was born in Egersund, Norway, a small town in the south that had actually been broken up and divided 3 years prior, meaning that the population of the town he grew up in was only around 3,700 people.
What?
Very little is known about his childhood, as is the case with many black metal musicians, but what is known is that Aarseth rebelled from the conventional norms of his small town from an early age, and he was inspired by other metal bands, like many of his contemporaries. One of these bands was an English group known as Venom, based in Newcastle. Venom was also trying to escape from the conventional norms that they felt trapped in, but instead of breaking away from society, they were actually trying to break away from metal itself. They wanted to take everything up a notch, from their sound to their imagery, and that's exactly what they did on their sophomore album, released in 1982, which was actually called Black Metal. It was an 11-track album that was filled with satanic imagery, shocking lyrics, and louder, more extreme production that would prove to be hugely influential to thrash metal, extreme metal, and of course, black metal, even lending the name to the genre. A 22-year-old Euronymous, desperate to rebel and do something similar, would be hugely influenced by this album and would cite it as one of his main inspirations for starting his own band with some friends in 1984.
Euronymous was the one that died, right? And Varge was the one that killed him?
Called Mayhem, which was derived from a Venom song titled Mayhem with Mercy. And it was started by drummer Shekel Monheim, who simply called himself by his second name, bassist Jorn Stubberud, otherwise known as Necro Butcher, and Eystein, who played the guitar, and originally called himself Destructor, but later changed his name to Euronymous. These three would have a rocky few years at the beginning, with a number of different vocalists that would make some of their earlier releases inconsistent but interesting nonetheless. They would attract a small but loyal underground following and perform at some local venues, but the most important thing they did was build the foundation foundation for what Mayhem were to become. It was only a matter of time before everybody in Norway was talking about Mayhem and black metal in general, although this wasn't necessarily a good thing.
Hi,
in the
Dorado.
beginning, Mayhem performed covers of songs by groups that they were inspired by. In an interview with Necrobutcher, he claims that they were essentially learning the instruments as they went, and that their sound was closer to punk than to metal.
So does Mayhem have any original members, like, still left in it? Because I know they're going on tour with Cannibal Corpse.
Not yet found their dark sound, and this boils down to inexperience and their vocalists. On their first demo, Euronymous was their lead vocalist, but after it was released, they decided to search for some session vocalists to improve their sound. The two that they found were Eric Billy Norheim, otherwise known as Messiah, and Sven Erik Christensen, otherwise known as Maniac. Norheim practiced with them multiple times, but only played one show with them in 1985 before eventually quitting to focus on other musical endeavors. Maniac, on the other hand, stayed with the band for a few years and was their lead vocalist when they recorded their first EP in 1987, known as Death Crush. This 7-track project definitely had darker undertones than most metal records at the time, but it was only a glimpse into the shocking music that Mayhem were truly capable of making. While some of their lyrics were dark and satanic, the instrumentation was a bit less abrasive, and the imagery was a bit more low-key and toned down, but the EP was still very raw. In the book known as Black Metal, Evolution of the Cult...
And who is Necrobutcher? Bassist. Have been with the band since Dead was the vocalist.
By Dale Peterson, Monheim stated that the sound technician they worked with had never recorded music that was this heavy and basically didn't know how to record it properly. This also meant that the music was not mixed and that nothing was overdubbed. Today, this would be a cardinal sin in the world of music, but in this case, it actually helped the record sound more raw and authentic, and it made for a pretty decent death metal EP that sold around 1,000 copies in Norway. Still, despite their sound being dark and controversial, they hadn't pushed the envelope enough and still hadn't developed into the full-on black metal band they were to become. Before that would happen,
the Pink version is the best version of Death Crush.
In 1988, Monheim left the band and was replaced by Jan Axel Blomberg, otherwise known as Hellhammer. Maniac, who had established himself as a competent vocalist on Death Crush, would also leave the band, and his replacement would help change the direction of Mayhem and black metal forever.
A man named Dead. What a name.
In 1986, an introverted 17-year-old from the south of Stockholm, Sweden, started a band known as Morbid. This man was Per Pelle Olin, otherwise known by his pseudonym Dead. Morbid only released one demo with Dead, known as December Moon, released in 1987, but this was more than enough to showcase the potential that Dead had as a vocalist. His voice was dark and menacing, even at 18 years old, and even though this 4-track project was basically a raw experiment as opposed to a polished piece of work, it was more than enough to show what Dead was capable of doing.
Necrobutcher left after Dead died. I'm getting out of the music. Hold on. Just in case.
After this demo was released, Olin felt as if Morbid weren't going anywhere.
I love this photo, though. This is one of the most, like, iconic photos, and I love it so much.
Wanted to be a part of something bigger and more established. His answer was Mayhem. According to Necrobutcher, Dead sent him a package that contained the Morbid demo, a letter containing his plans for the future, and a decomposing rat. Obviously, this was bizarre, but the demo was definitely good enough. They invited him to join the group, and in 1988, Dead moved to Norway and replaced Maniac as the lead vocalist of Mayhem. It didn't take long for the band members to realize how strange Dead truly was. They would reflect on this years later in interviews.
I'm not sure I knew Pelle, the other Pelle. Dead Pelle we knew very well, and I guess the whole world, which are interested in Mayhem or in black metal in general, they know the image of Dead in Mayhem and his lyrics and what he stood for. But the private peddler was a strange guy. The first time I met him, I got angry because I'm a kind of light-minded. I'm enjoying life. He did not, really did not. He was kind of depressed.
Oh no.
I do think that the real peddler was a great part of Dead, the figure Dead. I do think that, but not in the extreme way. But that was something he just dressed up and became. But he was also that on a regular daily basis. He slept with dead birds under his bed because he wanted to smell death, and it was an image. He
really?
Was depressed. He was looking for death.
Maybe he was like a psychopath-ish. He left dead birds under his bed so he could smell death. That's strange. And he's only like 18 years old. That's crazy.
Morbid and strange he was. His talent and intensity as a vocalist was undeniable, and his dark image played a big part in transforming, or at the very least, emphasizing Mayhem's aesthetic and sound. By the time Mayhem entered the stage with Dead for the first time in 1990, their image had become darker and more intense. A lot of this boiled down to who Dead was as a person. As stated previously, he was obsessed with the idea of death, and because of this, he would harm himself on stage and around his friends.
Damn.
His bandmates and friends did not like this and were understandably concerned, but Euronymous was fascinated by Dead and his antics and encouraged this kind of behavior to continue. According to the people who knew both Dead and Euronymous, they got on each other's nerves quite a bit. There were stories that they would torment each other, fight with each other, and there was even a bizarre claim that Dead had stabbed Euronymous while they lived together. A lot of these claims are difficult to prove.
Thank you so much for hanging out. Girl with no father figure, TikTok boys with no father figure. Damn. I had no idea that he was like hurting himself on stage and stuff, and that Euronymous was like egging him on about it. That's crazy.
But the rumors and stories tell us that these two did not get along, and that Euronymous was usually the main aggressor in their disputes. It got to the stage where Euronymous was egging Dead on to take his own life, an idea that he would unfortunately follow through with.
Jesus. Was Euronymous the one that took the photo of Dead after that? And was he the one that tried to do the bootleg thing? This is nutty, dude. And then, of course, this is all, like, happening, you know, during the Satanic Panic, which is not helping.
In 1991, Dead, Euronymous, and Hellhammer were living near the small village of Krokstad in a rural house that was in the woods. As previously mentioned, Euronymous and Dead were getting on each other's nerves, and this home was becoming a difficult environment to live in. Hellhammer stated that Dead just sat in his room and became more and more depressed. On the 8th of April 1991, Dead was left alone in the house and decided to take his own life, leaving behind a bizarre note that said, "Excuse the blood." The note also contained some bizarre statements from a man who was clearly in need of some help. These included statements like, "I belong in the woods, and I've always done so. No one will understand the reason for this anyway. To give some semblance of an explanation, I'm not a human. This is just a dream, and soon I will awake." He was only 22 years of age. Euronymous was the first one to come home and find him, and his reaction was bizarre. As stated earlier, he was obsessed with how dark and morbid Dead was, and to come home and find out that he had taken his own life was actually a pleasant surprise for Euronymous. So much so that before calling the authorities, he went to a local shop and purchased a disposable camera that he used to take pictures of Dead's body. He also allegedly took some of his bones and made necklaces out of them, a story that the band has since confirmed to be true. The next day, Euronymous called Necro Butcher and informed him of Pelle's death. In an interview with The Guardian in 2005, he explained what it was like to get the news. "Astein called me up the next day and says, 'Dead has done something really cool. He killed himself.' I thought, have you lost it? What do you mean cool? He says, 'Relax, I have photos of everything.' I was in shock and grief. He was just thinking how to exploit it. So I told him, 'Okay, Don't even call me before you destroy those pictures. Euronymous claimed that he would get rid of the pictures, but he never did, and Necrobutcher ended up leaving Mayhem because of this. This meant that half of Mayhem were now gone, and it seemed as if the band would naturally fade away, but Euronymous had other plans, and if anything, he was only getting started. In his eyes, the death of Pele was a positive turning point for both Mayhem and black metal. He started to go on a crusade to preach the importance of black metal and what it meant to be a part of this genre, using the death of his former bandmate to his advantage and claiming that Dead took his own life because black metal had become too trendy and commercial. Now, it should be noted that Dead was definitely critical of certain artists, and he believed that bandwagoners were a very real thing in the metal community. But while he opposed trends, he didn't necessarily oppose the idea of Mayhem or other
I don't know who's like more troubling, Dead, Euronymous, or Varge. I feel like Euronymous trying to profit off of this is like sick. Like, that is awful.
Metal bands becoming commercially successful. In 2016, a former pen pal of Dead, who had direct correspondence with him, released a collection of letters that he had sent to him while he was alive. These letters were pretty revealing, and we learn a lot about Dead by reading them. But one thing is for sure, he was very focused on the sales and success of Mayhem. Like any passionate musician, he wanted his music to do well, and he constantly referenced his distribution plans, the sales figures that Mayhem were achieving, and other black metal bands that were doing well at the time. The reason I'm making this point is that Euronymous wanted people to believe that Dead took his own life because black metal was becoming too successful, and that simply wasn't true.
No.
It pretty much goes without saying, but Euronymous used Dead's passing to further his own agenda and emphasize his own elitism. He was able to convince people that black metal was something worth
Maybe that's why Varge killed him. Necrobutcher is also a character. Watch his interviews. I saw the guy lose it on stage at Mayhem shows. Good God. This is sad, but it's interesting.
And he now had an actual martyr to go along with his story. And it worked. With his newfound notoriety, Euronymous opened up a record store in the summer of 1991 known as Helvete, or Hell in English. He also used this store as the headquarters for his record label, Death Like Silence Productions, which was relatively inactive before Helvete opened up, but it was now ready to fully embrace and support the black metal revival. The store also served as a location where like-minded musicians could meet, which helped Euronymous revive Mayhem from the ashes by finding suitable replacements.
It just seemed like Death mostly just harmed himself, but was like relatively, I guess gentle? Harmless, I guess. Whereas the other two were like, God. It was a lie about the bones. It was a gimmick. He used chicken bones. Euronymous, biggest poser ever. Haunted Entities spreading some words here.
They had a full lineup again, and they were ready to resume recording.
You think so?
Snore Rush, otherwise known as Blackthorn, joined as a guitarist, and Attila Chihara became their new lead vocalist. They still needed
My birthday's on Wednesday. You better be there at the stream, bestie.
Bassist, however, and unfortunately for Euronymous and for Mayhem, the person they chose for that spot would not only play for the band, but would also help set off a chain of events that would destroy the band.
Oh God, here we go with the Varge daddy. Good Lord.
In 1991, an 18-year-old known as Varg Vikernes created the one-man group known as Burzum. A year later, in 1992, he released a self-titled project under that name, and it was clear from the get-go that Varg was an exceptionally talented, well-rounded musician who at 19 years of age was crafting some of the best atmospheric black metal of his time. At this stage, Euronymous had created what was described as a black metal inner circle, and he was the de facto leader of it. It was a small clique of musicians, and in Euronymous' case, it was a great way to source potential talent for Mayhem, and Varg, being one of the most talented young musicians in the scene, was a perfect fit for the band. He joined as a bassist in 1992. Euronymous was more powerful than ever. His band, his label, his store, and his inner circle were all working in his favor. He had essentially created a well-oiled machine that was especially designed for him, and because of this, he started to make a list of rules and regulations that you had.
So, at this time when Varge joined, who was singing in Mayhem? Was it Euronymous? Like, who took Dead's place during this?
to follow in order to be a real member of the scene. The main rule was that you had to be a Satanist. He didn't even care about what kind of metal you were making. As long as you practiced actual Satanism, he considered you a part of the black metal scene. He said, if a band cultivates and worships Satan, it's black metal. In a way, it can be ordinary heavy metal or just noise.
Really?
What's important is that it's satanic. That's what makes it black metal. Another strange rule he had was that his listeners had to be deemed worthy to listen to Mayhem's music. In multiple interviews, he talked about listeners who were unworthy and therefore should not listen to black metal.
Det jævla stor etterspørsel etter skiva da, og den har jo gått for opp til 1500 kroner på svarte markedet. Og vi mener at den gangen den skiva kom ut, så var det kanskje en 20-30 mann som fikk tak i plata, som fortjente å eie den. Og resten av de som fikk tak i den en hel haug med idioter.
This kind of elitism gave the genre
an cringe. I'm enjoying it.
Boring but exclusive energy that added to the already insane image that black metal had, but probably did more harm than good and stopped potential fans from enjoying these artists' work. However, a lot of people were willing to follow these guidelines, and it did nothing but add to the cult leader-like status that Euronymous had created. He was on top of the totem pole, and his ego was at an all-time high.
The vid cringe?
Understandably, tensions started to rise, and Euronymous' image became a confusing one, with some people thinking that he was a god, while others believed that he was an egomaniac on a power trip. Many members of the black metal community started to criticize his way of thinking. One of these critics was Varg, who still worked and associated with Euronymous.
You're a sellout if you sell more than 50 copies. Oh my gosh. So this is Euronymous, right? He kind of looks like a pig. I don't know. He just looks like a tool. You know?
Stop a power struggle from brewing. It's widely believed and reported that Varg wanted the power that Euronymous had. But with him owning the store, the band, and the label, the cards were all in his hands. Whether this power struggle theory is true or not, it was fueled by an insane chain of events that would ultimately lead to a murder.
I think Varg just had enough of Euronymous' stuff. I think he was done.
It's not surprising that black metal wasn't the most commercially successful genre of music in the early 90s. The exclusive nature and the abrasive sound made it a difficult genre to be a part of, and in the eyes of some of the musicians, the only way to really promote it was to embrace this stereotype further and generate enough controversy so that journalists would write about black metal. According to a blog that Varg wrote in 2004 while he was in prison, he hatched a plan with Euronymous to promote the Helvete store and attract more fans to the genre. Under his pseudonym, Varg gave an interview to a Norwegian newspaper, and in it, he claimed that he was responsible for the burning of a church and that he had killed a man in the town of Lillehammer. In 1992, almost a dozen churches were burned down in Norway, and in many cases, the culprit was still a mystery. On top of this, a man actually was murdered in 1992 in Lillehammer, but this was done by another black metal musician known as Bard Faust. That did not stop Varg from taking credit for these crimes, at least anonymously. This interview served as a confession that members of the black metal community were responsible for these church burnings, and the intention was to make the interview as provocative as possible so that it would promote black metal to the masses. Well, it essentially worked. A media spotlight was now on the genre, but there was also a target on their heads. Varg was quickly arrested under suspicion of committing these crimes, along with other members of the black metal community, and allegedly, Euronymous' parents told him to shut down the shop as to avoid any unnecessary attention, meaning their misguided attempt at some free promotion was essentially an utter failure. Varg was eventually
such a nice and normal genre with normal people.
Released in March of 1993, and at this stage, he was essentially done with Euronymous. They had already had a dispute about money a year prior, and this was the tip of the iceberg. He explains his growing dislike for Euronymous in the same blog post that he wrote about the interview. Euronymous had made a complete fool of himself by closing down the shop, and most of us agreed that he was a damn wimp and an idiot. I was angry at him for not taking advantage of the situation, which was why I had done that silly interview in the first place, and I didn't want anything more to do with him. As far as I was concerned, he didn't exist anymore. For some months, this dislike for Euronymous spread in the metal scene as more and more people understood what a moron he was, and he blamed me for all of this and started to hate me. He believed it was my fault that people lost their respect for him. In a sense, he was right, as I certainly didn't keep my opinions a secret. But I think he brought that upon himself. He was simply disclosed by the way he reacted to the heat. He had made a fool of himself. Further, when the media wrote all that crap about me, it made him feel less important. Suddenly, he was no longer the main character in the hardcore metal scene. As he saw it, that too was my fault. According to Varg, Euronymous was so angry that he hatched a plan to kill him, and when Varg caught wind of this, he wanted to confront Euronymous and put this behind him. They had a contract that Varg needed to sign, and Euronymous invited him to meet him in person. Instead of setting a time and a place, Varg just drove to Oslo unannounced with Snort, the guitarist from Mayhem at the time.
Snort?
When they arrived at the apartment, an insane series of events unfolded, and there are multiple different accounts of what happened, so for the sake of being fair and thorough, we'll run through the different possible scenarios.
Sounds like Euronymous, deserved it. I ain't gonna lie. Sound like he had it coming for a long time.
First, there is Varg's retelling of the night, which he wrote about in this blog post, but he also did an interview where he essentially recounts a similar scenario.
The only reason he had to contact me was a contract.
Is that a turtleneck? Or is that his neck? That looks, oh my god, he looks like that cockroach dude from Men in Black, that first alien that takes the skin off that dude.
And
he can barely fit in it.
So he sent me the contracts and wanted me to sign them.
That's a turtleneck, y'all, don't worry.
Okay? There's no reason to wait. Let's just go to Oslo and get done with it. So I drove to Oslo. But of course it takes some time to get to Oslo. It's 500 kilometers of bad roads and mountains.
Eating too much cake. Oh, God.
It took some time to reach. I think we were there in 3 o'clock or maybe 4 o'clock. So he was sleeping. I told him, well, I don't care if you're sleeping, just open the door. And he opened the door, which is rather strange, really. He just opened the door. And even though he had plans to kill me. Damn. And when he had this beeper, and when I got up in the apartment, he panicked. Because, he probably, he had plans to kill me.
It was all just talk, though. I bet you it was all just talk. I feel like I know Euronymous, his behavior now, because I've met people like him before. And I bet he just, was like, oh, I'm going to kill this dude. But Varg was testing him. He was like, yo, bro, we'll see.
Was aggressive, so he panicked. He attacked me, he kicked me in the chest, I just threw him to the ground. A bit stunned, really, because, he attacked me, I didn't expect it at the time. And I was stunned for a while. He was just sitting on the floor, and suddenly he got up, trying to get to his knife in the kitchen. And I thought, well, if he's going to have a knife, I'm going to have a knife. So I had a pocket knife, this small pocket knife. I got it up and prevented him from getting into the kitchen, so he didn't manage to get his knife. And then he started off started to run off towards his bedroom, where we kept the shotgun that Dad shot himself with, as well as electroshock pistol. It's turned out later on that he didn't have any of these things in the bedroom, but I believed it at the time. And that is the reason I followed him. And instead of going into the bedroom, he just left the building, really. He just started to run down the stairs. And I followed him and managed to stop him. And of course, I had a friend with me, actually the guitarist of Mayhem. And of course, he was rather shocked. And I waited, because I didn't know how he was going to react. He was the guitarist in Mayhem. So for all I knew, he could attack me as well. Maybe they planned it.
Do you think it was, justified what Varg did or not? It's just a genuine question. Because, what if, Euronymous did have plans to do it? But I don't think that, I think it was all just talk until he had to prove it, and then Euronymous was scared. Was really scared, but Varg was probably like, yo, bro, I'm going to protect myself. Maybe Varg really was trying to do that. I agree, Justin. I'm just trying to think of,
Get a bit paranoid in situations like that. So I just waited for what's going to happen. I just waited. Also was on the floor. He broke a lamp on the wall, so he was swimming in glass fragments with only his underwear, so he was rather bloody. And this other guy just ran past me. And of course, I understood that he's not a part of it. So I asked him, "Are you okay?" And he just ran off. And then I remember that he had my car keys. And I had blood all over myself, and Åset got up and attacked me again. So I finished Åset off.
God.
I just, what do you say, stabbed him in the skull, so he died immediately. And I followed the other guy, but he ran to the car. So I managed to calm him down. He gave me the car keys, I opened the car, and we drove back.
That was Snore that was with him. Can you imagine being Snore and you see all that and you're like, Bubba, I thought we were just going to talk. Varg definitely seems like a psycho in all this. Like, he's so calm. I think they were both absolutely idiots. Didn't change much, maybe for the worse in how delusional he's gotten. What is it about? Oh, God.
So in this situation, Varg is essentially pleading a form of self-defense, but it's important to note that in the blog post, he admits that Euronymous attempted to run away multiple times and that he was angry at his cowardly behavior. I gave chase, stabbed him, and was a bit surprised when he ran out of the apartment instead. It made no sense to flee, and it made me angry to know that he had started the fight, but the moment it didn't go his way, he decided to flee instead of fighting like a man. Such is always something I have disliked strongly. He had showed his intention to kill me, and even though he was no longer a direct threat to me, there and then, I did not feel any bad for killing him. His cowardice had made me angry, and I saw no reason to let him live. Not when he had showed his intent to kill me. Had I let him live, I would only let him have another attempt at my life later on. This blog post made the self-defense...
Yeah, right? Stabbed 23 plus times or something for self-defense. Varg! Oh, lordy.
More difficult to justify, and it's important to remember that this is coming from the man who actually committed the murder, which is obviously a very biased source. What's important about this blog post and Varg's confession in general is that he claims that he was the only person responsible for the death of Euronymous and that he had no original intention to kill him. This is a vital piece of information because the other account of this night is wildly different. Both Varg and Snore were eventually arrested for the murder of Euronymous, and the police wanted a confession from both of them. At first, Snore denied having any involvement in the crime, but eventually he changed his story and he admitted that Varg had planned to kill him all along and that he persuaded Snore into being an accomplice.
Oh my
gosh. This is the story that the jury bought, and Snore was sentenced to 8 years in prison, while Varg was sentenced to 21 years in prison, a sentence that included charges for arson, as he was also convicted of multiple church burnings that happened a year prior.
Damn.
The answer probably lies in between both of these stories, and it wouldn't be surprising if there was indiscrepancies and inconsistencies in both of these accounts.
Yolanda Saldivar? Oh my gosh, yeah, she's the one, the like best friend or assistant or something of Selena, right? That was what it was?
By the sounds of it, Snore was probably
he just
in
fell
the
on
wrong
23 knives,
time,
right?
But Varg's self-defense claim is also quite flimsy
on the
when
stairs,
you zoom out.
Justin.
But the result was the same. Euronymous was dead, and the black metal community and Mayhem would never be the same again. It was a sad tale of ego, power, and what it all ultimately leads to, death.
The album that ended it all. Oh gosh.
At this stage, I'm sure you're asking yourself why we haven't talked about actual music for almost 20 minutes. And the answer to that is there was barely any Mayhem music to talk about. Throughout all of this carnage and all of this bloodshed, Mayhem hadn't released an official studio album. They had some demos, recorded rehearsals.
No. Spooner, get your butt over here. Oh, he's howling away. Spooner!
And live shows, but it wouldn't be until 1994, a year after Euronymous was buried, that Necrobutcher and Hellhammer came together to finally release their first album. De Mysteries dom Satanos, a Latin phrase that means about the mysteries of the
And
Lord
this is
Satan,
a really good record,
strangely
apparently.
fitting name given the circumstances. This may have been the best thing that Mayhem ever made, and it was one of the most culturally significant and important black metal albums of all time. It was dark, fast-paced.
Do we need some happiness? Come here, Spoon. Oh, now he's getting in his crate. Come here, Spoon. Come here. Do we need a fat boy to break the tension? Do we? Come here. No? Okay. He's deciding to be fat on the floor.
Well crafted and thought-provoking. It was the culmination of 7 years of absolute insanity, and it had a baffling lineup. Almost everybody we talked about had a part to play on this album. Hellhammer supplied the drums, Attila Chihara was the vocalist, Dead and Necro Butcher were credited writers, Varg was the bassist, and Euronymous was the guitarist. After everything that had happened, after all of the fights, the insults, the suicide...
And this album came out after Euronymous died, right? And was Varg, like, in prison at this time?
...and the murder, they were all together for a final time. Mayhem are still active today, with Necro Butcher being their only original member left, but nothing would top this album. It was truly a phenomenon, and it's one that I highly recommend you listen to. A group of men in their early 20s had changed the landscape of metal forever, but lives were ruined and destroyed in the process. A sacrifice that I'm sure most of them were unhappy with, but some of them probably didn't mind.
Oh my gosh, that evil smile. So we have to listen to that album now. De Mysterious is the best. De Mysterious, that album. That's pretty much it. Jesus. What did y'all think? After all of that? Oh my gosh, now that makes like so much sense why everybody liked that album. Because I really liked the songs we listened to on Death Crush. Attila was very different but enjoyable. It's a pretty good, like, you know, little small channel vid, you know? I thought. I really liked that. So now that absolutely has to be a freaking album we cover on the channel. You saw it once before? I saw your message. Don't act like I can't see your deleted message. Euronymous died in 93. De Mysterious came out in 94. Hellhammer had to lie that Varg was not on the record to get it released. Whoa, really? What just happened to Justin? I don't know why your message was deleted, but I still have it here. Did somebody fat finger? Was it you, Spoothy? It was. No, it's fine. Because I can still see it. I think y'all can too. Put user in timeout? No. Mayhem is pretty wild. Never got into them, although my dad is a pretty big fan. It's not just me with fat thumbs. Y'all are funny.